All of that to come, but now in the clash. We're asking, should we build more nuclear power stations? At the COP26 summit in Glasgow today, it's Energy Day. That's right, Energy Day, with thousands of delegates discussing how to keep the lights on. But with wind power exposed as hopelessly unreliable, and anyone living in Britain knowing it's hardly a solar paradise, aren't we missing the obvious and most green answer to our looming energy crisis? Nuclear power. Well, with me to debate this, I'm delighted to welcome three scholars in the energy market. Pete Wilkinson, chairman of the campaign group Together Against Sizewell C, a reactor project in Suffolk. Dr. John Stanley, senior research fellow at the Bow Group think tank. And Alex Epstein, founder of the Centre for Industrial Progress. Alex, let me start with you. Do you think that actually nuclear is the holy grail? It's zero carbon and very reliable.
I think potentially it is. I mean, if you look at what was happening in the 70s, you were building nuclear power plants around the world, including in the US, at relatively low cost. And then suddenly it became catastrophically expensive to build them. And so one of the objections today is, oh, it's too expensive. But that's because of the anti-nuclear green movement that claims to care about CO2 emissions, but actually just wants to oppose all forms of human impact on Earth. So nuclear has unlimited potential, but it needs to be decriminalized. So when you hear anyone say, oh, it's too expensive, those are usually the people who made it expensive by criminalizing it.
Yes, and certainly there's a strong environmental case for nuclear power, is there not? If you're worried about global warming.
Yeah, it's the obvious thing, right? I mean, you could tell somebody, okay, imagine we have a source of energy that can be cheap, that's incredibly reliable, that can be used anywhere in the on the globe. At least for electricity, it also has promising applications in terms of transportation, in terms of industrial heat. You would expect the anti-CO2 movement to say, oh my gosh, we're thrilled. But actually, they've destroyed and criminalized it. And there's nothing that can come close because solar and wind are unreliable. So they need their parasites on reliable power. And then hydro is great, but it's location limited. So nuclear is the holy grail if you care about CO2. But even if you just care about cleanliness and safety, which is more my focus, because it's the cleanest and safest source of energy ever. And it's so revealing of the modern environmental movement that they are the ones who have criminalized it.
However, Alex, I have spoken to experts on this programme who have said nuclear is great in that way. It's certainly clean in relation to carbon emissions, but it's not very nimble-footed. It's not great for sort of short-term energy supply issues. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, at least with the current nuclear that we use, but that can provide huge percentages of power. So you take a place like France in terms of providing a very large percentage of its power. We have a lot of need for what's just called base load power. So you can have other things like natural gas to be nimble. The unreliable solar and wind, they're not nimble. They force you to be nimble because they go up and down erratically. And so you need natural gas to compensate, which is why the UK is so screwed when the wind goes down, because then you're dependent on natural gas. And of course, you guys ban fracking and you make yourselves dependent on Russia, and that's why you have an energy crisis. So there's a whole dimension of, yeah, you need to drill for fossil fuels and use those too. But yeah, nuclear has incredible capability, and the future applications, if it's not criminalized, may well be very nimble as well.
Pete Wilkinson, you're very welcome to the show, and you're shaking your head there.
Thank you. Yes, well, there's lots of things to shake my head at. I would say for a start that I guess whether you're for or against nuclear power depends on how you judge the benefits and disbenefits. And I'm not a zealot, and I'm certainly not a criminal, and I haven't criminalised anything whatsoever. All I've done is looked at the pros and cons and decided that, in my view, the cons of nuclear power outweigh, the benefits greatly in many, many ways. And nuclear power is not zero carbon. Let's run away with that idea. Even when it's operating, it generates a small amount of carbon. But if you look at the carbon footprint across the uranium fuel cycle, then it's very considerable. So let's assume that it's zero carbon. And if you look at Sizewell C in particular, which I know a lot about because I live about 5 miles away where they want to build this thing, it won't be carbon neutral. It won't even be carbon beneficial to us because at the end of its construction period, which, by the way, takes 12 to 15 years, so we're not really dealing with an emergency, a climate emergency in a very rapid way by building something that takes that long to start producing its relatively low carbon electricity. But at the end of the construction period, it will leave us with a carbon debt of 5 to 7 million tonnes. So it's not low carbon. It produces carbon, And of course, by the time it is constructed, if it does get constructed by 2035, the entire electricity sector will be decarbonised, according to Mr. Johnson. So there won't be any carbon in the system for it to offset anyway. So the benefits of nuclear power are minimal in that respect.
Pete, what about energy independence so that we're not reliant, for example, on Russia for gas?
Well, the fact is we're reliant on lots of other countries in the world that are not particularly Anglo-friendly for the uranium. We don't have any domestic supplies of uranium, so we have to import the uranium anyway. So there's no independence. I mean, when Blair announced this in 2006, nuclear was back on the agenda with a vengeance. He said it was for energy security reasons and climate change. Well, energy security was the lights weren't supposed to go out if we go nuclear. We haven't had any new nuclear since 2006. The lights haven't gone out. Electricity demand has gone down. And, and in terms of carbon reduction, it's not going to help us at all. It won't. Nuclear was not going to help us in this country, that's for sure, to drive down carbon.
For sure. Thanks for making that point, Peter. I'll come back to you in just a moment. Dr. John Stanley also joins us, a senior research fellow at the Bow Group think tank. And Alex Epstein mentioned France, which I believe enjoys 60% of its energy supply via nuclear. Angela Merkel made a big call for Germany in not having nuclear energy at all. And now the Germans are reliant on gas from Vladimir Putin. So do you accept the energy independence argument for nuclear power?
Is that the question to me?
Yeah.
No, I don't. To be quite honest with you, I think what Germany has done, along with a few other countries in the world, is a very brave thing. It's going to take them a long time to turn away from their existing power production, but they are doing it slowly but surely. They are importing a lot of electricity, it's true, and gas, and they're burning more coal than they used to. But the trajectory in Germany is to get away from nuclear power, quite rightly in my view, and they are cleaning up their act. It's going to take them a long time, but that's the sort of trajectory we should be on in this country, developing our renewables at a pace. I mean, Johnson has had so many opportunities to say something really revolutionary about renewables in this country. He's missed every opportunity given to him. How many thousands of acres of rooftops are there in this country that don't have photovoltaics on them? It must be in the millions. And we're putting up house after house after house with no photovoltaics on. They leak energy left, right and centre. I mean, we are just profligate with the use of electricity, and we've got to change it. And there are ways in which we can do it.
Thank you for that. High time we heard now from Dr. John Stanley. What do you think? You're a senior research fellow at the Bow Group think tank. What's your view, John?
I think if you want a sovereign, secure and sustainable energy supply, and you want it to be affordable, and you want that technology to be proven so it's not a pipe dream, you've got to go for nuclear when you have a temperate climate and you don't have hydropower resources. It's as simple as that. If you're like Norway and you have lots of hydropower, that's great. If you are Spain and you have lots of solar resources, that's great. My interest is the United Kingdom. We're a very small island. That means energy imports have to come by sea. And so energy security for us is more important than many other countries.
And
so nuclear is
how
the way to
safe,
go.
though, John, is nuclear? Because there's always the danger of an accident. And what about disposing of nuclear waste?
Okay, well, British nuclear reactors traditionally have been extremely safe because they don't use water. The one at Sizewell is a little bit different. But, there's a lot of technology just around the corner. There are British companies that are building research units in Canada now to test out something called a molten salt reactor. We have a liquid metal reactor in Russia that's been operating for 40 years, and it doesn't even need to mine uranium. It turns all of its existing fuel into new fuel. So there are safe reactors out there, there are modern reactors out there, and every argument you've heard against nuclear power are very much 40-year-old Fisher-Price arguments that may have applied to some older reactors. They may apply in countries that don't reprocess fuel. And of course, we've just closed Sellafield. But they don't apply to new reactors. They don't apply to this new technology that's just around the corner. Let's just look at cars, for example. If you have a problem with petrol or diesel engines, you move to an electric motor. You don't just get rid of cars just because some are polluting or not safe. You improve.
Although, John, what about the eye-watering cost of building these nuclear power stations? And as Peter pointed out, the long lead-in time, 10, 15 years in some cases.
Sure, but again, he's talking about a few specific examples in Europe that are using a new EPR reactor. It's a kind of Franco-German Frankenstein reactor. If you look over in South Korea, they've been able to build water reactors at a much lower cost, and they're turning them around in something like 7 or 8 years. So that's a specific problem for a specific reactor that France is selling here.
Alex Epstein, what do you think is the direction of travel for nuclear in this country? Do you think that the political will is there to commit to this energy source?
Well, I think you need to commit to liberating it. So most of the problems, including the one you just mentioned, are because, as I call it, it's criminalized. And I think people like Peter are part of the problem. Let me just say one thing, because it seems like we're living in an alternate universe. So if you go to just twitter.com/Alex Epstein, I posted UK electricity 2 days ago, where wind completely failed and it had to be totally bailed out by natural gas, and nuclear was totally reliable. So there is no cost-effective substitute for nuclear. You could argue gas is better than nuclear in certain ways right now, but these unreliables are not good. So you're building a bunch of useless solar panels in the UK, that's going to solve anything? No, you'll get an occasional spike. Like I live in California, we have blackouts because we have over-reliance on solar. Texas had blackouts because of over-reliance on wind, and they defunded their natural gas plants, and in particular their weatherization. So these unreliables don't work anywhere to produce reliable energy, so they should be off the table in terms of an alternative. In terms of non-carbon alternatives, nuclear is the best, but you have to liberate it.
John, do you agree?
So how many months of the year is a pressurised water reactor offline?
Wait, hold fire. One moment, Peter. Just come briefly to John Stanley. Do you agree, John, with Alex Epstein that the issue with nuclear energy is it's been sort of badly sold? It needs a bit of a makeover. It needs a sort of PR push so that people can see the benefits.
I think it has been demonized by the environmental lobby, and they have their own motivations for driving down energy use in general. That seems to be very much part of what they're doing. But if you look at countries like South Korea or France or Slovakia or Hungary, they are producing over half of their electricity from nuclear, and it's just not been a problem for them. And it's actually a source of national pride in France because they build it themselves, because that engineering prowess is there, and you're employing huge numbers of people, creating that energy domestically rather than sending your money abroad to some quite dodgy regimes, to put it mildly.
Well, John, it's not a problem until it's a problem, which we've seen in Japan.
Again, I'll come back to the idea that ever since 3 Mile Island and then Fukushima and Chernobyl in between, every single one of these problems has come about because of a combination of human error, but also these reactors specifically use water in them. And I've said that there are reactors around the corner that we could build that don't operate under pressure. They don't use water, so they can't produce hydrogen even during an accident, and so these problems can't happen. I mean, it's in the name. If you have a molten salt reactor, it's designed to operate with fuel that's molten, so it can't melt down.
Pete Wilkinson.
Zero deaths in those tragedies, though. There are zero deaths in those alleged catastrophes. There are zero deaths from radiation from Fukushima and from 3 Mile Island. So what you have, again, is the anti-human impact environmental movement that demonizes nuclear. Those were proof that nuclear is safe. Even the worst use cases in the civilized world show that nuclear is safe. Even Chernobyl, which involved a reactor that was never allowed anywhere in the free civilized world, more people in the Soviet Union died from Soviet toasters than from Chernobyl. Nuclear is incredibly safe, and it has been demonized, it has been criminalized, and we should be liberating it in any case. But anyone who claims to care about CO2 and is anti-nuclear is a total fraud.
Pete Wilkinson.
Thanks very much.
You live...
I don't know what that makes you.
Peter, you live 5 miles from the proposed location of Sizewell C. Isn't this just about the view from your garden? Isn't that what this is about?
No, I've been anti-nuclear for donkey's years. I started Friends of the Earth in this country, and I'm also a founding member of Greenpeace UK. So I've looked at the facts over the years, and as I said earlier, it is an option. Nuclear is an option. It's not an imperative. And what we've got to do in this country, and I think around the world, is look at the ups and downs of all the technologies we've got out. I'm not a zealot. I'm not up there on my soapbox every day saying we can't build nuclear power. It's entirely up to the country to do what it decides to do. But let's, for goodness sake, have a sensible, open, and grown-up debate about it rather than calling people criminals. Let's argue the case about nuclear. Now, nuclear power is a capital-intensive, very advanced sort of technology, although it's coming into being antiquated now. It's been around for so long, and it leads to proliferation of nuclear weapons. It's very costly. It's uncertain in many respects. It is very costly. I'm sorry, it's no good shaking your head. 23 billion pounds started off at about 8 billion.
It's your fault.
To build
It's not linked to nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons.
One at a time, please.
South Korea has no nuclear weapons and has a civilian industry. You've got two countries there, chalk and cheese. One has a civilian power network, the other one doesn't, and the one that doesn't has nuclear weapons. So they're not linked.
Of course they're linked. Why do you think that the Science Policy Research Unit at Sussex University analysed why this government in the UK, we're talking about the UK at the moment, is so enthralled to the nuclear industry? It looks at it from every single angle, from cost to environment to the food, the supply chain, the whole works. And its view was that in order to continue with trident nuclear weapons of mass destruction, which rely on murdering millions of innocent people as a
that's
defense
what they're built for.
In order to keep that going, it has to keep the supply chain going here, and it has to keep the skills, the supply chain for the nuclear, the supply chain for the nuclear, and also the knowledge base.
Can you tell me one
workforce.
component of a nuclear weapon that's made in a civilian nuclear reactor?
It's the parts. It's the parts.
Which
it's the parts for the nuclear industry. It's for the skills. It's for the
There is enough
base.
reprocessed plutonium right now to build 20,000 Hiroshima bombs in warehouses in Cumbria. You want to get rid of that? You put it in nuclear reactors and burn it.
No, you have to have trident submarines in order to lob them over. So it's all that sort of technology, the hardware that goes with it. Well, that's what I'm telling you. This is what Science Policy Research Unit came up with. I'm not.
My viewers
it's not my report.
Are boiling with rage. Take a listen to this, Peter. Why no mention of small modular reactors, a fantastic source of instant energy? How about that? So many emails.
Well, they're about the size of Sizewell A, about 400 megawatts. They're not small. You want one on every corner, do you? You're still going to have the same problems of radioactive waste, about planning, about all sorts of issues that go along with nuclear power at the moment. Coolants, God knows what else. They're not small at all. It's just a pipe dream. If there ever was a pipe dream, they are.
What SMRs are.
Nina's not happy. Nina says, dear Mark, until new reliable technologies are put on the market at an affordable price, nuclear is the future for our energy needs. Nuclear power provides clean and reliable energy. We need to ensure that new nuclear power stations are built in the right locations in our country, which are at low risk from flooding. This is the way forward. I'd argue that you're on the wrong side of history on this one, Peter.
Well, I'm sorry, but the right place in this country is not on the coast if we're worried about flooding, is it? And then where are all our nuclear power stations?
It depends.
On the coast.
Depends where on the coast.
Yeah, but you look at the one at Sizewell. Sizewell itself is going to be an island in 100 years.
Okay.
And we're building
It's interesting that's mentioned because Greenpeace apparently is very concerned about rising sea levels. It's a €400 million a year public relations firm. Last time I checked, its corporate headquarters are in Amsterdam, which is 2 meters below sea level now.
Yeah, well, I left Greenpeace 20 years ago. I agree with you.
Live from the United States, Alex Epstein, you get the last word.
Yes, again, nuclear has this amazing track record. It's been criminalized by the Green Movement. And what the Green Movement proposes, these unreliables, again, go to Twitter, at Alex Epstein. It's very clear. These are parasites. They cannot support any economy. Anywhere they're used, it causes cost and reliability problems. And it's the anti-human environmental movement led by Greenpeace that is responsible for the inability to have cost-effective alternatives to fossil fuels. So I love fossil fuels. I wrote the moral case for fossil fuels, but I love nuclear too. And the people who claim to care about CO2 are the worst enemies of nuclear and therefore non-CO2 power.
Gentlemen,
Mark, could I just make one point, Mark,
Go,
please?
Pete.
There's more energy falling per square metre on the Earth's surface than we can ever possibly use. We have the technology to harness it. We just don't have the political will to do so.
Not cost effective.
There you are.
Can
I make one last point as well?
Run.
There's one elephant in the room.
The source of the energy turns up free of charge.
Pete, John, what's
Yes,
the
but
elephant
the process is prohibitively
The
expensive.
elephant in the room
That's the problem.
is
Read my book. I'll send you a free
to know
copy.
a source of radioactive waste in the world right now, it is the mining of rare earths. Those rare earths are essential for the wind industry. That nuclear waste is not stored away like it is with the nuclear industry. That radioactive waste is currently sitting in slag heaps in China, and it's being rained on. And that rain is washing into rivers and washing into the sea. That is a fact. You can see them. These rare
I'm not
earth mines,
suggesting it's not a fact.
and they leave huge amounts of radioactive waste.
Okay.
I understand about the rare earth argument. I understand it's one of the things that we've got to have a sensible conversation about,
Well,
and rather
let me tell
than
you,
calling people criminals.
It has been a very sensible conversation. My profound thanks to all three of you for contributing to this debate. Pete, thanks for joining us. Pete Wilkinson is the chairman of the campaign group Together Against Sizewell C. Dr. John Stanley, senior research fellow at the Bow Group think tank, and Alex Epstein, founder of the Centre for Industrial Progress.